Well, welcome back to part two. Yes, we made this a two-part video for the sake of time, actually, because this is actually so involved. It is pretty much in depth. So, forgive me for diving in deep and going geeky. I've got about 18 liters in this container, so I put 8 pounds. And remember, I use about 1.5 pounds per gallon. And what 18 liters brings me about 4.5 gallons or so. So I've got plenty of room in here. I've got about 15 liters in this one and 12 liters in this one. So I split the grain accordingly, the corn. And we're going to cook that corn, and I'm going to bring it up to 180 degrees. Now, the reason I'm going to bring it up to 180 degrees is because I want to hydrolyze it. What do I mean by hydrolyze? Starch, and I'm going to show you this on some slides, but it's got a crystalline structure. And we've got to flood that in order to make it available so that when we use our alpha amylase in our grain, that we can convert that to fermentable sugars. Otherwise, it'll always be hidden forever. So that's really why we're doing that. So what will happen is I've got this at 180 degrees for about 30 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes for a good cook time. And then after that, I've got to drop the temperature, and the way I'll do that is I'll just add a little bit more water. Remember, you can't go wrong with more water. And I'm going to bring that down to about 160 degrees. Now, I have 10 pounds, 10 pounds of 2-row barley that's already crushed and ready to go. And I'm relying on the alpha amylase in the barley to convert the starch to fermentable sugar. Now I'm going to drop it to 160 because I know that once I add 3 pounds in each one of these, or thereabouts, that's more than enough. For that amount of corn. When I add those grains, that's going to drop the temperature at least another 5 degrees, because what I'm looking for is that sweet spot. And what is that? Yeah, that was your cue. Of course, that was a question for you. Yeah, it's 155 degrees. Oh, I don't have my pen handy. That's all right. 155 degrees Fahrenheit is the sweet spot for alpha amylase. And then I'm going to allow that to set for 90 minutes, and that should convert all those starches to fermentable sugars. Now, of course, we're also going to go through the starch test, which is to use iodine and the test for the presence or the absence of starch. Okay, very good. Now, I've been tracking temperatures. Getting rid. This one is really close. These may be familiar. This is that large still that I had. I'm using it now as a cooker. And I've got these two that I do the same thing with. So there's many different ways of going about this. So please don't get hung up on, just make sure you got the proper equipment to do the job that it's designed to do. Okay? Well, an error on my part, forgetting to push the record button. Yeah, I got to sneak this in. I want to talk about corn. Okay, corn is the differences of corn themselves. I mean, this is a totally separate topic that you can get really deep into. Remember, all corn is not created equal. Therefore, that sort of like answers the question of why I'll get calls or I'll get emails about different results from corns. Sometimes it's the process, but a lot of time, remember the three-legged stool, it's the ingredient itself. Now, the government does grade corn in 5 different categories. But to understand corn, you just need to know, first of all, that there's really 3 basic types of corn. Styles of corn. There's white corn, there's yellow corn, and there's a variety of colored corn. But it really falls into 4 different categories. And that is dent corn, flint corn, infested corn. The name infested, it's got weevils and other bugs and stuff in it. And then there is waxy corn. Now, the primary difference, the 2 best ones, of course, are the dent and the flint corn. If you're using infested corn, you get what you get. And waxy corn, we'll talk about that in just a second. The corn itself, and I wanted to show you this, we'll do a close-up. And what I have here is I have a mixture of dent and flint corn, and I'll show you what the differences are between the two. Now here's a close-up of some corn kernels, and you'll notice in here the primary difference is A dent corn is a little bit more elongated, and it's really customary to have a small dent at the very top, at the crown. Whereas your flint corn is more round in nature, not as elongated, and is absent the dent. So those are the differences between the two corns. And this one is a mixture of, and they're equivalent products, but that's the difference between the two classifications of corn. So I have a mixture, and this would more than likely be classified as dent corn because the content of the flint corn in here is so low. And if you have more flint than you have dent, then it would still be a mixture, but it would be classified as a flint. And those are the two really, they're good corns. And again, remember, there's yellow and white. Now, waxy corn. Here's the primary difference. And a lot of times your feed and corn used for adhesives and other processes, they tend to use the waxy corn as opposed to the regular flint or dent corn. And the reason is because of the characteristics and the makeup of each of the kernels. Oh, I know that goes a little, that's geekish, but it's the truth. Now, waxy corn is almost 100% amylopectin. And dent and flint corn is about 75% amylopectin and 25% or so of amylose. And we know anytime we use the ose, it indicates a sugar of some sort. Now, they're all laden with polysaccharides, but the easiest way to tell the difference is to actually take the kernel, and I lay these on a block and then take a razor and then cut them lengthwise and then place them in a dish. So you just lay it out lengthwise and then cut across the length of that until you make two separate pieces, which actually exposes the germ and everything inside the kernel, and place that in a dish. Now I've got a mixture here. This is half iodine and the other half so it's a 50-50 mixture of iodine and distilled water. And then give those a spray. You don't want to soak them, you just want to spray them. And then allow that to set for a couple of minutes, and you'll notice the difference as the color starts to change. Now you'll notice, as we allow this to set for a minute or so, you'll notice that the colors in here, you'll see these are the dark blacks and purples, or indicate a dent or a flint corn. Whereas if this was a reddish brown, it would be a waxy corn. So we have no waxy corn in our mixture at all. So every bit of this corn will be a combination of amylopectin and amylose, which makes a great base for a corn mash. So there you have it. You can do your own test at home and test your own corn products just to make sure that you've got a quality corn, because everything is in an ingredient. One of the three legs of that three-legged stool. Now, as this is cooking up, I wanted to show you this. I've got a colander inside here with a screen just to keep that all that corn offset from the bottom so it doesn't scorch. But you can see that gooey mess that it starts to make, and that's one way you can tell that you're starting to hydrolyze all those starches, because it makes that gooey mess and you've got that foam on top. Now the other ones will come along and just in due time, but it takes them a little longer. Now, while we're waiting for all of that to cook, I want to show you a few things, okay? Now this first slide, you'll notice this. Okay, this is microscopically what that crystalline starch looks like at the beginning of the boil. And you'll notice how spread out and how identifiable you can see its boundaries are. Okay, and that's what makes starch so stable. And then that's at about 150 degrees at the very beginning. All right, now if we allow that to cook, and now here's a slide, and this is what that same starch starts to look like as it starts to gelatinize, hydrolyze. It starts to soak up all of that water because we've got a surface area that allows us to actually get at it. And you'll notice how they start to swell. Now that's at about 170 degrees or so. In this last one, now this is where it looks at 180 degrees after it's cooked for about 30 minutes. And you'll notice how swelled up all of those starch molecules are. Now those starch molecules are just loaded. They're loaded with these long fatty chains, and what we've got to do now is we've got to get in there and we've got to use an enzyme. And now that they are bloated and they're ready to explode, for lack of better words, and open up, we allow those enzymes to get in there and start to chop those chains off and convert those starches into the fermentable sugars that we're looking for. And we'll discuss a little bit more about that when the time comes. I love it. I love being able to explain this, because once you can put this in your mind's eye and you understand what's happening, you'll go back to your recipes and what you're doing, and maybe you'll find some faults and errors or maybe some missteps. Who knows? Or maybe you have a better way of doing it. That's quite all right. Again, don't violate the principles. All right, we are done cooking this, and you'll see that this turns into like a, you notice that thick, it's like a porridge. Oh, wow. Yeah. Maybe oatmeal style, real soupy grits. But now what we've got, that's all hydrolyzed starches in that corn. It's time to get to the next step. I've extracted some of the liquid from my mash, and now I've got the iodine, okay, in a small eyedropper, and I'm going to show you what happens. I'm going to add, I'll add 1-2 drops, and if you look at that, you'll notice that dark cloud that it's making. You see how the blackness of it? Now, if it stays black like that, that is the presence of starch. And once you put our amylase in there, and you'll notice that it just keeps, it spreads out, but it just turns black. Once we put our amylase in there, that will dissipate and turn to a really, really light brown or a pinkish red. It'll dissipate and sometimes even disappear. And that's how we can tell when we've converted all of the starches into fermentable sugars. So we're on to the next step. It's time to add our 2-row barley. Sort of like the moment of truth. Now I've waited my 90 minutes as my 2-row barley set inside here and just steeped at 155 degrees. Now of course it's lower than that now, but most of your conversion will take place in the first 30 to 45 minutes or so. But then you allow it to continue just so that you have a full conversion. Can you stop it early? Certainly. I mean, what's an extra 30 minutes? You know, most people would say an hour. I give it 90 minutes. Now, let me show you. I want to show you the difference, and if you can recall back in how, what type of viscosity this, how it was like a porridge. Let me show you what it looks like now. Now, you can see the difference that is nothing more. It's like just like a liquidy soup. Every bit of that's broken down. And oh, by the way, it's time to do the starch test. Now, this is actually the fun part. I've already collected some of the liquid out of here. But the first thing you can do, this is a dead giveaway. Stick your finger in there and taste it. It should be sweet. That is really sweet. That I'm really impressed with that. Now, let me get some iodine. And let's do our iodine test. I mean, we're here, we might as well. I put 3 drops in there. Now, watch what happens. That actually, oh, there we go. That actually dissipates and disappears completely. So I have no starches left in there, which I'll drop a few more drops in there. And the same thing, you see it dissipate, and I have no starch in there whatsoever, so that means I've converted everything to sugar. All right, now what time is it? It's time for a self high five. Okay, let's move on. My next step is, and we haven't discussed this yet, it's in a few of the videos, but we haven't discussed this yet, and that is I need to adjust the pH. Why am I adjusting the pH? On your pH scale, it goes from 0 to 14, 7 being neutral, or being, yeah, right there in the center, that's base. And then anything above that will be alkaline, or what they really consider base. That's 7 all the way up to 14. And anything below 7 is acidic. Well, your yeast are really, really accustomed to and really like an acidic environment. What are the benefits of an acidic environment? The first thing that's really beneficial for an acidic environment is that it lacks the environment for bacterial growth, but it doesn't inhibit yeast growth, a key in a good fermentation. So the goal that we're looking for is 5.2, anywhere in that general area, all right? And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to test this by sticking this in here, and that's before we, better take the cap off. That is before we transfer this and then check the gravity. We already know there's fermentable sugars. And right now I'm at 4.50. 4.50 is a little low, but I'm not really that concerned about that. Let me check this one. 4.52. I'm okay with that. And 4.89. Okay. So the effects of the amount of grain that was in my mash, because I adjusted it to 5.2 to begin with. I always do that with my water. Anytime I use water in any kind of a mixture, the very first thing I do is I just adjust it to 5.2, just for the sake of argument. That's my starting point. And in this particular case, the corn and the grain has brought that acidity level down, which is a little bit of a surprise to me, but I'm okay with that. I'm going to leave it as it is. I could boost that back up, but I'm happy with it where it's at. I'm in that neighborhood of 5.2. If I was really low, like 3, and there are some wines that like to ferment at 3, and nothing really below a 2. But I'm okay with this. So now that we've got that completed, so my next step is to cool this off and add it to the fermenters, check the gravity, and then adjust the gravity accordingly. So let's just test the gravity first. Now we know we know my reading's going to be off because of the temperature, and right now the temperature in this is probably still quite high, probably in the 130s, 140s range. Yeah, 136. So my gravity is going to be off a little bit, but it's going to give me an indicator. It's going to kind of give me an idea how much sugar, if any, that I will need. Now, what is my goal? My goal is 1.090 is sort of like my max goal. That gives me about 11.5, 12 or so % potential alcohol by volume. And why do I use that? I find that to be probably the sweetest spot for my purposes, all right? And remember, we talked about this earlier too. Once you get to 15% alcohol by volume, the warning flag ought to be going off, because the potential of you having a stuck fermentation is really, really high. So I'm going to leave it at 1.090, or maybe short, maybe a little bit below that. Again, it's totally up to me. So let's test the gravity and see where we're at. Well, much to my surprise, 1.042. And that's if I correct this for temperature. That's amazing. I was expecting a 3.6, maybe a 3.8, but 4.2 is just fine. So what do I need in order to get to 1.090? Well, I'm going to need another 40 gravity points. almost 50 gravity points, 48 to be exact. And in order to get there, see, I can always use sugar. So if I add a pound of sugar per gallon, and a pound of sugar in 1 gallon will raise it like 39 gravity points. So if I've got 6 gallons in here, and I put 1 pound per gallon and put 39, if I put 6 pounds of sugar in here, that should bring me up to a little bit over 1.080. And the same thing for these, based on volume, is what I'll add. So that's where I'm headed now. We're going to add some sugar, and then we're going to allow this to cool off, and then I'll place it into the fermenters. And that's going to be an interesting process. I'll tell you, because these things are heavy. I'll siphon it out, and then I'll do some pouring. I'm going to leave the grain in there, because to me right now it's going to be easier to leave the grain in and take it off later after it settles than to try to settle all that. It's been a long day. Trust me. So either way works well. And I'm not leaving the grain in there for any benefit of flavor or any benefit of anything else other than just pure laziness. It's just fine. Now for the final. Yes, you'll notice back in the corner I've got all my fermenters are full, and I'm using that mini brew. I've got a large fermenter, and I've got, of course, the 2 glass ones. I've got about 26 or almost 27 gallons of corn mash. Yeah, it's already started to ferment. It's been probably about 20 minutes since I finished that. You know, I added the yeast. I did not have to add yeast nutrient. You know, corn and barley in itself has plenty of nutrient in there. If you want to add some more, it's perfectly fine. Just remember, if you overdo it with yeast nutrient, you tend to get a little bit more of an off odor. So I would be cautious. Only use yeast nutrient when you absolutely know that you need it, which is in a sugar wash. Other than that, use it very sparingly. Okay, look, that thing it's going to go, do its thing. Lesson learned. I need to get a bigger heating source. That really large 19-liter still that I have worked extremely well, but I need to get a little bit larger a pot for the rest of it, because 25 pounds of corn and 10 pounds of 2-row barley is a tall order. Now, this whole process took me about 9 hours. So I would say, if you're going to do this, make sure you set aside some time, because now that does include cleanup. Cleanup took quite a while. I had a righteous mess in here. It gets everywhere, and of course your hands get all sticky, and it's always a good sign. Whenever your hands get sticky, you know you got fermentable sugars. So please comment below, share us with your friends. Of course, subscribe if you haven't. This is a free option for you, and of course, yes, we do benefit if you subscribe. So thank you very much. And to everybody out there in the community, of course, as always, you know, happy distilling.